All right, everybody, with us this week, we're joined by Mikey Henninger, the founder of Brewed Fantasy Football. Despite all you baseball fans, no matter what happens, football is the primary sport on this podcast that we always talk about. There's always football guests. There's beer related, but of course, football season is 24/7, 365, especially with the draft coming up. But Mikey is someone that we've been following along, and he's been making some awesome content. And we're going to hear a little bit about, obviously, the brand itself and how you made this transition to do this as a full-time gig. But Mikey, welcome to the podcast, and how's everything going?
Yeah, thanks, guys. Really appreciate being on here. Everything's going pretty well, man. It's chaotic, right? I'm a one-man business, a one-man fantasy football business, and everybody's like, oh, this is usually your downtime. And I'm like, you'd think so, but we just launched a podcast and getting ready for the draft and all that stuff, man. It never stops, but living the dream, man. Can't complain.
So my first question is, I got to assume you have a child, or is that hoop in the background for you?
I have 2 children, but that is not for them. That is 100% for me, for sure. Anytime they go near it, I tell them they need to go back upstairs. All right.
So you've upgraded from the back of the door one to the full, the tots one.
I had a back of the door one up there, but you can see my ceiling is super low. We actually recently redid our basement, and the ceiling in there is much higher. So I moved my door one in there. So I have a little bit of both, whatever I'm feeling that particular day.
No, you might have to take them on like 2-on-1 and see what happens at this point.
Oh, I'll get my butt kicked, like physically. They will just tackle me, and they don't understand fouling and all that stuff yet. So we'll get there.
I feel there's no rules. It's street ball downstairs in the basement.
That's true. No blood, no foul. But they'll make me bleed. So don't get it twisted.
So, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who is Mikey Henninger, and give us this 60-second e-pitch afterwards of, the Basement Brewed Fantasy Football.
Yeah, man. It really depends where you guys want to start, right? Because as of the last 2 years, I'm a full-time fantasy football analyst. One-man business for my subscribers, but if you would have asked me this 3 years ago, I had spent the previous decade in B2B sales, selling like software and marketing services. So there's 2 completely different sides of me. So which one do you want to start with? Where I'm at now, or where I was a couple years back?
Kick us off from the very beginning. Not birth, but in between.
Dude, I mean, this thing does actually go pretty far back, if you'll believe it. So I guess I'll try and keep it on the short side. Out of college, I spent the first decade of my career in B2B sales, selling software, moved over to a marketing firm where I was the director of sales over there. And eventually I was just kind of getting to this point in my career where it just wasn't really it was great. I loved my team. I loved the company that I worked for, and the money was good, but there's nothing about it that I was hopping out of bed, super excited about it. So I got to a point where I was just, waking up, doing the work, collecting the check, paying the bills, going to bed, and then doing it all again the next day. And I wasn't doing much all at the same time. So that's happening on this hand. All at the same time, I had been creating some fantasy football resources as just a little bit of a side hustle. Actually, it wasn't even that to begin with. I was creating just for myself when I played fantasy football. And a buddy of mine, once he saw this one tool in particular that I create, it's for start sit decision. I'm guessing you guys play fantasy football. You're big sports guys. Who doesn't play fantasy football? But
you're talking to the guys that had Chris Hansen do their draft order this past year.
Oh, no. Okay. So yeah,
it's safe to say we take this pretty seriously around here.
100%. So you guys are definitely familiar with the start sit conundrum that every fantasy football player faces every single week. I have 3 guys. I can only pick 2. Which should I? So anyway, on the side, I had been creating this resource just kind of for myself. And one of my buddies sees this tool and he's like, dude, you got to get this thing on Reddit. This thing is nuts. And I'm like, okay, why Reddit? I don't know if you guys have ever been on Reddit. It's terrifying over there. There's a lot of unhappy people hiding behind screen names with no profile pictures. But anyway, he convinced me to do it. I put it on there and it blew up. I had complete strangers in my DMs asking for my Venmo, asking if they could donate to use the tool. So while I'm kind of burning out my B2B sales career, I'm having complete strangers trying to hand me money that I'm not asking for. And eventually it got to a point where I'm like, I'm doing it. I'm quitting the B2B sales thing and I'm diving 100% all in. So 2 years into this business, almost exactly, it was March of 2022 that I dove all in, and it's been one heck of a ride, man. I never had any intention of owning a business. I didn't know anything about being an entrepreneur or, filing taxes as a business and stuff like that. But here we are 2 years later. It's fun.
And so a lot of stuff in there to unpack. I think, just from your podcasts and your websites and your collateral now, it's clear that you were obsessed with sports at a very young age, right? Like at 11 years old, I saw on your LinkedIn, you were writing game recaps on your Madden games.
Yep.
I mean, it's safe to say that this is just in your blood. So what was it about your childhood that just made you fall in love with sports and then Madden and football in particular?
Dude, I don't know what it was about my childhood, but literally as far back as I can remember, I've been obsessed with the NFL. And maybe that has to do with me being born and raised as a Packer fan, because I was born in 88, which right around the time of me starting to understand football was 95, 96, 97, which is when the Packers got good. They went to the Super Bowl. They beat the Patriots. They lost to the Broncos the next year. I locked myself in my bedroom and cried for 3 days. But like, yeah, man, it goes way, way back. Actually, when I was about 8, I always say I had to be about 8 years old. I don't know if you guys remember. They might still make them, but they make pencils where every single pencil is the Lions, the Packers, the Jets, the Giants, every single one. And I invented this game when I was about 8 years old, where I would close my eyes and I would grab 2 pencils and I would just twist them in my hands like this and drop one. Whichever team I dropped was the losing team. Whichever team I was holding was the winning team. And I would go update my notebook like, oh, Packers 1-0, Bears 0-1. And I would do seasons of this with friggin' unsharpened pencils. So yeah, man, I've been obsessed with the NFL forever. And I don't know where it came from. It's just me, I guess. I don't know.
I feel like the pencil game's now a gambling technique. That is definitely the good juju that I would use now, grabbing up the Sunday slate and just picking it off of pencils. It's better than all the research and information, right?
Sometimes it works that way, man. I spend 30 plus hours a week digging through, football research, and sometimes I'd rather just grab a pencil at random, and that might perform better some weeks. You never know.
Is that where we've evolved over 20 years, from the pencils to now, like when the Roomba and your dog picking picks and stuff? Is that the new evolution of this, I guess?
Pretty much. Yeah, it's like we reached that top of the mountain and now we're going back to the whole random side, because it's probably because people get so beat up when you do put all that work into something and it just doesn't quite work out. But that's why you always got to remember process is more important than results, right? So.
Absolutely. So I think a common misconception that people don't realize with fantasy football is how long it actually has been around. Some people only think of it as the ESPN app or doing it on the desktop, but the years and years prior of the handwritten drafts, the draft boards. And so for yourself, what was that first year that you did fantasy football? And when was the first year that you actually competed in fantasy football and started being like, okay, let's actually try to win this and not just do this as a hobby?
Yeah, I love that you brought that up. I was actually kind of a late bloomer in the fantasy football game, which is crazy for how much I was obsessed with it back in the day. But I didn't play in my first fantasy league until I was, I think, 17 years old. And at the time we played on Yahoo. So I wasn't a part of the generation that I talked to a lot of old timers. I feel bad saying that, but they call themselves old timers because they talk about we used to have to write our stats and fax them in. And I'm like, I love that. That's awesome. But for me, it's always been digital. It was Yahoo to begin with. And that was just with a group of buddies where I had no clue what I was doing, by the way. I literally drafted Mike Allstott, a fullback, in that draft. That's a whole nother story, but
great all fullback pick, but not a great fantasy.
Right. If you're going to pick a fullback, that's the one, but yeah, not a good fantasy pick. But yeah, man, it all started there, and then I actually ended up winning that league despite starting 1-7 and changing my team name to I'm Rebuilding, which you can't do in a redraft fantasy football league. But after that, I mean, the obsession reached new heights. It went from one league to several leagues, but then even that got that wasn't enough for me, and I started DFS and betting, of course, but I'd say where I really became a little bit of a competitor, I guess I would say, is a March Madness style fantasy football league that I played in. This had to be 15 years ago now, where there's literally 64 teams in this league, 4 different conferences of 16 teams. Each conference does their own draft, and the first 10 weeks is like total points just for scoring. And then the last 6 weeks is the March Madness style tournament, single elimination. And I ended up winning that league. So I took first out of 64 teams, and I turned a $25 entry into $1,000. And that was kind of my moment where I'm like, okay, maybe I should look into creating some of my own analytics or making it available outside of just for myself, you know?
And, you know, you alluded to this, but you're 26 years old at the time. You're tired of questioning your stardom sit-em decisions.
Mm-hmm.
You make this resource to de-risk it. What is this resource, and where did you start?
Man, this feels like a time where I should share my screen, but I won't go there. Yeah, man, for me, it was like I used to subscribe to a lot of the usual publications, right? The Fantasy Pros, a lot of different. And by the way, I have nothing against those guys. I know a lot of the people in the industry, and they're all great humans, but the resources that they provided just didn't do it for me personally. Like, if anybody plays fantasy football, they're probably familiar with what I'm talking about. You usually get like a list of rankings, right? Player A, player B, player C, player D, and you're expected to just trust that blindly. And for me, it never told the whole story. Like if I'm considering a wide receiver, I want to know what corner he's going up against and how that corner performs against slot versus X versus Y. So I got to a point where I started doing 30 plus hours of research every single week. And I would literally write a matchup analysis for every single player on every single team in fantasy football, every quarterback, every running back, every wide receiver, every tight end. That got to a point where I would take all of that data and all that information and bring it over to this glorified Google sheet, like a Google spreadsheet that it has all the players on it, but more importantly, it has their matchup analysis and what to expect from that player in that game so that you can read it. You can go in and click any player you want and say, okay, I'm considering these two guys. This guy's got a much better chance of having a big week than this guy does. So basically what it comes down to is deciding, is this the type of player I want in my lineup this week? Is this not the type of player I want in my lineup this week? And nowadays there's people using it for DFS. One of my subscribers sent me a message that he was on like a 27-9 hot streak on like NFL prop bets and all that stuff. So it's crazy, man. The whole idea is if there's any player you're considering in your fantasy league or prop bets or DFS, all you do is click on their name and it's going to tell you everything you need to know about what to expect from that player in the upcoming game. And we're like, I'll go 3 running backs deep for most teams. Yeah. So it's crazy.
So when did you decide that you obviously build this out? How long was it just for yourself? When did it get to that next level of like, hey, let me send it to a couple friends, to now at the point where you were like, let's go public with this?
Yeah, good question. So I was doing it for myself for a while, probably 3 years just to play.
Did
you win your leagues in those 3 years?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It
was kind of a prerequisite to take this full time.
Yeah.
No, we lost a lot, but use my stuff. Yeah. And you know what? It is crazy because this really wasn't, when I was doing that, when I first started doing that, I was never like, I'm going to turn this into a business. Candidly, I didn't think I was good enough because I knew there was a lot of really sharp brains in the industry. And I'm like, maybe that's more of a like self-doubt thing that I should talk to a therapist about. But the point is, like, I never had any intention of going full time with this thing. So I was doing it just for myself for about 3 years. And then it was a coworker of mine who I showed it to for the first time. And he was like, he like, it blew his mind that I was doing this. And he was the one who finally convinced me to put it on social media. I did it for free, if you will, or accepting donations for 2 years before I finally dove all in 2022. So this thing started maybe 6-7 years ago, and here we are 7 years later, and it's a business now.
And a great segue to your career, right? You're leading a B2B sales team. You're on a good trajectory. You could probably have a pretty good career in corporate America if you wanted it. But you decided that ultimately you're going to step away and try to pursue this full time. So what was the light bulb for you that you said, hey, I'm going to just go for this and see what happens? And what led into that decision?
Man, it's funny you say those specific words, because I always talk about the light bulb moment where it happened for me, and it's weird. So I already told you guys that it was this sort of scenario where my path, like two different paths were crossing, right? I was burning out in the B2B sales thing, and the fantasy football thing was taking off, or at least I had the social proof to tell me there's an opportunity here. That all culminated, and those two roads finally crossed in March of 22. We were on a little tiny spring break vacation with our kids, and my son was 5 years old, and he was still kind of a scaredy cat. He was kind of chicken, but he was starting to gain courage to go down some big boy rides, if you will. So we're at a water park, and he says, "Dad, I want to do it. I want to go down this water slide." I'm like, "Sweet. Like, finally, I don't have to like sit in the lazy river for 8 hours." So we climb all the way up. It takes like 30 minutes to get up there. I'm freezing cold because, you're all wet and you're just standing in line waiting for a water slide. And of course, we get all the way up there. He takes one look inside. It's pitch black. Changes his mind. I don't want to do it. I'm terrified. I'm scared. And I was like, selfishly, I'm like, no. We just waited 30 minutes. We're doing this water slide. He did not listen. We walked all the way back down the stairs. But the light bulb moment there was I grabbed him by his shoulders and I said, "Hey, buddy, sometimes the thing that you're most scared of is the most important thing that you can do in your entire life." Trying to be like, do this slide. You're not going to regret it. You're going to love it. It's going to unlock this whole thing. And again, he didn't listen to me. We walked back down the stairs, but in that was the light bulb moment for me where I was like, oh, holy crap. I think I'm talking to myself right now where I'm going to do it. That was the moment where I was like, I'm quitting my job. I'm going all in. And I walked downstairs. I went back to the table and I talked to my wife and I was like, hey, when we get back to a computer, I'm turning in my 2 weeks notice. I'm turning in my letter of resignation. And that could have gone terribly, right? It could have been easy for her to say, no, you're not. We have a mortgage and we have 2 kids under 6. Like, there's no way you're doing that. But she was the opposite. She was very much like my biggest cheerleader. She was the one who said, she basically said, you have to do this. She said something along the lines of, don't think too much about the money. We can figure the money thing out. If money becomes a problem, like worst case, you go back to bartending. You used to bartend at Chili's. You can do it again. Or you have a decade of B2B sales experience on your resume that theoretically you should be able to get a sales gig. She goes, what we can't fix, what we can't repair is you spending the rest of your life regretting that you didn't take this chance when we know you have it because you have the social proof. Once you have complete strangers trying to give you money you're not even asking for, there's something there, right? There's something that you can go after. So she, thankfully and luckily, she was super supportive of the decision and she's never wavered in that. We're 2 years in and she's never, ever wavered in that confidence that it's going to go somewhere, which is awesome. So,
and that's incredible. And that's all you can ask for in a partner, right? I mean, that is so great to hear. So where did the name come up? And was this something where at that moment when you had your 2 weeks, you had any idea how to take this forward? Or was this just like something that was always brewing in the back of your mind that you finally put pen to paper and called it, Basement Brewed Fantasy Football?
No, dude, no. So the name, so those are two different things. The name Basement Brewed Fantasy Football, I've actually thought about changing because people see the logo and they hear it and they're like, oh, do you like Basement Brewed? Do you brew beer in the basement? I'm like, nope, it actually has absolutely nothing to do with beer, but it does. When I first started this, I would have like a podcast and a YouTube show that no longer exists because it was terrible. But I would open up a craft beer from Milwaukee and I would drink it on camera and kind of give a little bit of a review while talking about fantasy football. So the whole idea with Basement Brewed is that, like, growing up, I spent the majority of my time in the basement. My bedroom was in my basement where I would play my video games and do all that. Currently, like, my office is in my basement. So the thinking was I'm in my basement brewing up fantasy football insights, yada, yada. So it was I thought it was creative, but now it's like a brand where I can't really change the name. Totally forgot your other. Oh, once I actually started the business, no, dude, I had no clue. I had no clue what I'm doing. Like, I got the fantasy football part down, but then it's like, oh shoot, I need a website. Oh, I got to file taxes. Oh, I need to learn about like getting an LLC and what's kosher and what's not. Like, I'm 2 years in and I still have no clue what I'm doing as a business owner. No clue. A lot farther than I was 2 years ago, but I mean, it's
part of the journey. That's the whole part of the journey. We all start now, right?
I was going to say, like, what do you think you've grown the most at in this, as being a business owner, right? Like, you've got a lot of those administrative things to do, but what do you think now you would say you're better at that you had no idea how to start on day one?
I would say I'm finally getting to a place where it feels like the message that I'm putting out there, or I don't want to say sales pitch, because sales has always just kind of been in my background. I know how to sell, but how to position it to somebody who is getting to know me for the first time. Now, that is currently a work in progress because my website doesn't tell that story at all right now, and that drives me nuts. That's one big thing I'm working on. But to answer your question, my like elevator pitch for what this is and what it does, that has changed so much over time, where I think it's finally starting to click. And it's the sort of thing where I'm taking what that looks like and I'm taking it to a web developer and I'm asking them to tell that story on my website, which that's another thing, is delegating work. I used to try and do the website myself, and that's a terrible, terrible idea. So letting go of some things is something I've gotten quite a bit better at because I need to. There's no way to do it all. There's just not enough time in the day. But I don't know, man. I think when I think back about where I am now versus where I was 2 years ago, I do see noticeable growth. Like, I know I'm a lot farther now than I was back then, but I also know I'm nowhere near where I need to be in the long run. So it's only a matter of time, but we're still early in that journey.
So you touched upon it a little bit in, explaining you and the product and, of course, your brand. But what makes you unique compared to everyone else out on the market?
Yeah, so there's a couple things. Number one, I'm still pretty brand new in terms of not known very well yet. Like, if you ask somebody what kind of resources they would use in fantasy football, 9 times out of 10, a lot of them will say something like Fantasy Pros, which, again, they should. Fantasy Pros are great. But if you have 12 people in your league and 11 of them are using Fantasy Pros, there's no differentiation there. You're just using the same thing everybody else has. So I do have a little bit of an advantage of being that kind of unknown brand, because if you're using my resources, I can pretty much guarantee you there's nobody else in your league that has any clue what I do. And that's good for you. That helps you outsmart your friends. You're bringing something different to the table. But beyond that, the tools themselves are completely different than anything that's out there. That tool that I was telling you guys about that I made available on Reddit that kind of like started this whole thing, it's called the heat map internally. That doesn't mean anything to somebody who's never used it, but that tool in particular is completely different than anything else that's out there. Like, everybody else's rankings and tiers, and people will write matchups, but it's usually in like an article form. This is all like one centralized location that combines like rankings with projections, with tiers, with matchup analysis, all in one spot. So it's like the brand is unique because nobody knows about it. The tools are unique because they just don't exist out there. And the last thing I'll say is that my own personal strategy and like the way that my brain works with fantasy football is, and the way I approach preparing for fantasy football is different than pretty much anybody else I've ever met. And I make that all available inside of the content and inside of the tools that I bring to the table. It goes much, much, much deeper analytically than anything I've ever seen out there. So I don't know if that answers the question or if I kind of watered it down, but there's a lot. There really is.
No, it does. And I'm curious on that first one you mentioned. It's like, odds are 11 of the 12 people have no idea about your product, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, as crazy as it sounds, eventually you don't want that to be an advantage anymore, right? Because
Oh,
I
yeah.
feel like if you're going to build and scale this,
Yep.
you almost want, at least half the people at least considering your tool, right? So like, how do you navigate through that? Like how do you unpack that situation there?
Yeah, so it's funny you say that, because one big learning curve for me that I probably should have been prepared for that I didn't think about is coming from that B2B sales world. Referrals were king, by the way. Like if you were good at what you did, they would tell other companies who would contact you, and like it was easy to make money that way because you would make introductions. In this business, which is a secret sauce business, people who use your stuff don't want to tell other people about it, right? It's their own competitive advantage. It's their secret sauce. So that was a big learning curve for me. Like, shoot, this is going to have to be 100% organic. There's not going to be a referral thing. Now, as far as like how I'm prepared for that, yeah, you're totally right. Eventually, I want to be at a spot where more people know who I am, right? I need to make a livable income. We need to keep our house and keep food on the table. But I have long said that I am not doing this to get there's nothing about what I'm doing for the money. Like I'm not in this because I think I'm going to be a millionaire or anything like that. I just want to live the rest of my life doing something that I'm genuinely excited to do every single day. So if I can make a livable salary or a comfortable salary doing that, then I'm fine with that. And what that means is, there's 87 million Americans that play fantasy football or some variation of it. I need 2,000 of them to subscribe to my tool. So that could be one in every league. And even then it wouldn't even be close. So if I get 2,000 subscribers, I'll be able to do this for the rest of my life. So, and I know maybe that'll change 5 years from now. Maybe then it'll be like, oh, maybe we can go for this big number. But right now, honestly, that's not the focus for me. It's just getting it to a livable salary. And all that means is 2,000 out of 87 million people that play fantasy football.
Absolutely. And so for you, because like we joked about in the beginning, it's like football is a full year calendar sport. Yeah. What are you doing now in this post Super Bowl pre-draft? Yeah. Like what is the work that you're doing? And give us kind of a rundown of like, how do you break it out by month or by quarter or by week, or, what does a year look like for you?
So it's definitely seasonal, right? I always when people ask me this question, I like to say that this is the time of year where I go from working in the business to working on the business, right? Like during football season, I'm creating that heat map. That heat map takes me 30 plus hours a week because I am researching every quarterback, every running back, every wide receiver, every single week. Once the season ends, though, that's my opportunity to, I just scheduled a meeting with somebody to talk about redoing my website. Last week, I launched my podcast and my YouTube show, and I'm working with my editor and my producer to help with what that show should look like moving forward, reaching out to guests, reaching out to sponsors, right? So it's not just like a turn on the camera and publish it. Now it's also get back into sales mode, talk to some potential sponsors about sponsoring the podcast, the website, the YouTube shows. I'm talking to another guy about launching an AI product this year, which we already toyed with last year, and it got really good reviews. But basically, it's an AI product that if you, again, going back to the start sit thing, for example, let's say you just can't decide between player A and player B. You come ask this chatbot, do I use player A or player B? The chatbot goes back and references my 30 plus hours of research and says, I recommend this player and here's why. So anyways, I'm working with him on a couple different AI products for DFS and drafts and start sit conundrums. So anyway, the point is there's a lot that I'm doing to work on the business right now. What can I do to make sure the customer satisfaction level is at an all-time high? I got to make sure that I'm making sales. And this is a very slow time of year for me. There's nobody trying to buy fantasy football tools in February, in March. So a lot of it is planning and understanding that seasonal aspect of it, knowing that the majority of the work that I do from a financial standpoint is going to happen and hit for me in July, August, September. Those are the 3 months where I make my most money. So I need to make sure that I'm doing everything I can between now and then that people will want to spend their money on Basement Brewed fantasy football. So it depends on the month, man. If you ask me in 4 months, I'll be doing something completely different. I'd say the majority of my time right now is consumed by my podcast because it's brand new. I've put out 3 episodes and I'm still like getting into the swing of things with that, but hopefully that gets more on autopilot. I promised my subscribers I'd get to work on. Are you guys familiar with best ball fantasy leagues?
Actually, I don't think I am. No.
So best ball is the most addicting format of fantasy football ever, by the way, because all you do is the draft. So you draft a team, but you literally cannot. You don't set lineups. You don't do ads or drops or trades or waivers or nothing. All you can do is a draft. So it's basically like a mock draft, but with money on the line. Anyway, those things start right after the Super Bowl. So I promised my subscribers I'd get to work on my 2024 draft kit so they have something to use in these best ball drafts. They're usually on Underdog. I think DraftKings has them. I don't know if they're out yet on DraftKings, but I have to get to work on 2024 product already, even though it's only February. So there's a lot that's coming up, but it's all good stuff.
It's actually super interesting. I just Googled best ball and it's basically like a mock draft with stakes. And that's it.
Mock draft with skin in the game.
Awarding the best mock draft. That's interesting.
It's a ton of fun, man. It's addicting. A lot of people say, how many leagues do you play in? And I purposely, to mess with them, I'll be like, I play in about 500 leagues a year. And they're like, what? How do you do that? And I'm like, well, 475 of them are best ball leagues because you can't do anything. But yeah, it's crazy.
It's incredible. We might have to think about starting a best ball league. That'd be fun. We've got a lot of mock drafters in our network, so we'll have ours out later on for the NFL draft and all that stuff. But it's exciting stuff.
Dude, at BBFF, I have a couple like subscriber best balls where it's like the winner. It's not like if you're a subscriber, you can play. Winner gets a free T-shirt from BBFF. But people just love doing it because they love drafting. That's the funnest part of fantasy football.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, nobody likes the waivers and IR and all that stuff.
Right.
And off that, I mean, as we talk about football today, you've been obsessed with this for a while, so you're a good person to chat with about this. But how's fantasy different now than it was before? What trends are different? Like, I know the running back saga was a big thing last year. Did the stats back up the declining value and all this stuff? I mean, how has fantasy changed since you started working on this to now?
Dude, so you're talking about the fantasy landscape for playing, right? Like strategy?
I would say both. Like strategy. Yeah, the strategy definitely being the main one. Like, how in 2024 would I approach my team versus how I would do it in 2012?
Yeah, it's funny. So fantasy football, more than anything, is a game of public overreaction and underreaction, right? Like people will take what happened in 2023 and they will overreact when they apply it to 2024. And that's just part of the game. And that's where winners are born, is when you can exploit where people are overreacting and where they're underreacting, right? It's the whole buy low, sell high type of idea. But when you think about when I first started playing, running backs were king, right? It was the LaDainian Tomlinson, the Priest Holmes, the Adrian Peterson, Ray Rice, Jamal Charles. Now, at least over the last couple of years, I'd say 75% of my subscribers, as well as myself, were team 0 RB. Are you guys familiar with that strategy and that?
It's crazy. I can't wrap my head around it, but it's crazy.
So, and I want to clarify, it's less 0 RB and more hero RB, right? If you can get one of those high volume running backs in one of the first 2 rounds, but then you smash wide receiver, and year after year after year, the data continues to support that as the strategy to go with, especially if you're not playing in a best ball league. If you're playing in a league where you can play waivers, getting wide receiver and getting tight end right is key to being dominant in your fantasy football league, because running back is the most replaceable position in fantasy football, where a guy goes down, you scoop somebody off waivers. They might not even be a terrific running back, but if you can guarantee 13, 14, 17 touches out of them, they're going to get you at least 10 points in fantasy. And then you have that buoyed by some combination of like Tyreek Hill plus AJ Brown. Nobody's going to beat that. So it's very like more and more you're seeing wide receivers become less of the priority, except for the Christian McCaffreys, right? If you get a guy like Christian McCaffrey, you have an advantage over everybody else in your league. But how many Christian McCaffreys are there? There's one, so it's not like it used to be. It's fun seeing how, and eventually that's going to change. It's going to end up going back. That's just the way fantasy football works. I think you're on mute.
On mute right off the bat.
Wow, classic. It was I had to switch on my mic, and I switched it down and didn't switch it back on. I'm one of those guys. No, that was exactly what Mike Randall at FTN told us at the beginning of the year. It was, try to take a shot on James Cook if you can. I think you ended up with him, Tondo, but one of those guys that just was not the top tier. There was so much value that you could have had by employing that zero RB strategy this year, and I think that's probably going to be the same for a couple of years at least.
For sure. If you look at like I'm looking at 2023 finishes right now, like Rachaad White was the RB4 and he was maybe fifth or sixth round. Joe Mixon was RB6. He was in the fourth round. Kyron Williams, RB7. He was undrafted.
Wild card.
Nobody drafted him. Then James Cook was the RB12. There's just so many and Raheem Mostert, RB5, he had 21, 22 touchdowns, and he was drafted after Devon Achane. We're big believers at BBFF in the hero or zero RB strategy because we know we can get these guys. And we do have a strategy for when it comes to targeting these running backs because a lot of times it's predictable. Like you could have predicted the Raheem Mostert. I mean, nobody's predicting 20 plus touchdowns, but you could have predicted that he would be a fantasy football value based on where he was drafted, the offense that he plays in, and the uncertainty of that backfield heading into the season. So a lot of times we will target those uncertain backfields in good offenses.
No, I mean, this has been interesting stuff. So as we close out, what is that one general piece of advice? It might be the no RB method, but one general piece of advice that everybody who plays fantasy should always have in their back pocket.
Subscribe to Basement Brewed Fantasy Football.
A leading question of sorts.
Yeah. No, man, I would say there really is tough. And obviously it's going to depend on leagues, right? How many people are in it, how deep the waiver pool is, what the scoring is like. But typically speaking, assuming you're in a modern league where you start at least 3 wide receivers tend to be the priority now in fantasy football drafts. And you can find good ones, man. Like Keenan Allen every single year goes in like the 3rd or 4th round, and he's always like a top 10 receiver if he's on the football field. But anyway, you can walk out of the first 4 or 5 rounds of your draft with one-ish running back and then studs at wide receiver. So that would be my thoughts and advice going into 2024. But who knows? That could change by August, and that's why I'm here, because I'll be doing this type of content over the next several months.
Yeah, we're looking forward to seeing it, and an opportunity for you here now. Where can our listeners engage with your stuff? What kind of stuff are you putting out over the off season, and where can they go learn more about Basement Brewed?
I love it, man. So the website itself is basementbrewedff.com. And I actually put together a little promo code in case anybody wants to give BBFF a try from your show. They can enter promo code BALLS.
Oh, nice.
I just love that yours is called Beers, Business, and Balls podcast. So I grabbed balls out of there.
I'll take it.
Did I just say I grabbed? Anyway.
Oh, well.
Anyways. Maybe I'll change it to I grabbed balls. But yeah, if they enter just balls as the promo code, because I think that's funny and I'm childish, they will get 20% off their subscription. But if we're not there yet, if you're not ready for marriage and we just need to date for a while, my podcast is available anywhere you listen to podcasts, just Basement Brewed Fantasy Football. Heavily focused on getting the YouTube channel going. Last week, I interviewed Lane Taylor. He's a former lineman for the Packers. We talked about Aaron Rodgers. Search Basement Brewed Fantasy Football. And then other than that, I'm on TikTok at BBFF Mikey, Twitter at BBFF Mikey, or X or whatever it's called now, and LinkedIn. I'm actually super heavy on LinkedIn, Mikey Henninger. So
cool. Thank you very much for the time, Mikey. It was great getting to learn about you and about Basement Brewed Fantasy Football. And we are going to push this Balls promo code like none other. Thank you very much for that.
Awesome, man. Yeah, I really appreciate you guys having me on. This is a good way to spend a Wednesday morning, so I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Awesome. Take care, Mikey.
You too, guys.